Hello BookTube, Sarah here and welcome to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with my February 2020 wrap-up and stats. So February was a bit better month than January, and I am pretty pleased with everything that I read. I actually bookended the month with 5-star reads. I had two of them in February. One was the first book I read, and one was the final book that I read in February. So that was kind of a nice beginning and ending to the month. So, as I like to do in these videos, I go through all of my stats because I love stats. I love watching other people's stat videos. I love compiling my own stat videos, or compiling my own stats to do, and of course talk about them. And then I'm going to end this video off with the 5 books that were my top 5 for the month. So, let's get started. First of all, I read 19 books in the month of February. I read 18 in January, so I got one more than I got in January, so that was pretty good. I am currently 2 books behind my goal for Goodreads, but that's absolutely fine. I try not to panic or worry about that. It's just kind of a nice benchmarker to see how I do. And I think it was in February, I actually lowered my goal from, I think it was going to be 300 down to 240. So I think that's a little bit more of a manageable goal for me, as I am reading a lot less than I was last year. I was looking at my stats for last year and, I was reading almost double the amount. So, that has really declined. And the Goodreads goal, it's something to attain to, and I always like seeing that completed banner across it every year. So that's part of the reason why I lowered it. So I'm 37 out of the 240 books now completed for the year. I'm 15% of the way completed my goal. So that's exciting. So star ratings. I had 1 2.5-star read, 1 3-star read, 6 3.5-star read, 4 4-star reads, 4 4.5-star reads, and as I said already, 2 5-star reads. That is actually rare for me, and you guys know that if you've been watching my channel for a while. I do not give out 5-star ratings lightly. I really have to be wowed by a book, or it really has to mean something to me in order for me to present it with a 5-star rating. So 2 of them this month, that's pretty good. As for genres, I read 7 contemporary romance novels, no surprise there. I read 3 thrillers, 2 chick lit novels, 1 cozy mystery, 1 middle grade fiction, a mystery, a romantic suspense, a women's fiction, a YA contemporary, and 1 book about paganism, or something to do with paganism or neo-paganism. I always like keeping track of the Harlequin imprints that I read every month, and I read 1 from each of the following lines. I read a desire, a romantic suspense, a super romance, and 1 that at the end of its run was called the Western Romance, but used to be called the American Romance line. So 4 of them in the month of February in total. For age range of what the books were geared towards, I read 16 books geared towards an adult audience. I read 2 YA novels and 1 middle grade novel. For the years, the year that the book was published, I read 1 book published in the 1930s, 1 in the 1980s, 1 in the 1990s, 1 in the 2000s, and 10 between 2010 and 2019, and I read 5 books published this year in 2020, so that was exciting. For format, I read 7 on ebook, 7 on audio, 4 mass market paperbacks, and 1 trade paperback. For length, I read 18 novels and 1 anthology. The anthology would actually be considered to be novel length, but I do like to differentiate the fact if it was a novella, or not a novella, whether it was an anthology or just a full-length novel, like 1 story in its entirety. I read 12 books that were part of a series and 7 that were standalone. You guys know I love series, and they're like, everything is a series now, to be completely honest. If I come across a book that isn't, I'm actually surprised by that. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but it feels like everything is now part of a series. I read 8 of the books that were, so of the 12 books that were part of a series, 8 of them were ongoing series that I was already reading, which is fantastic. And 4 of them were brand new series that I started. That's not horrible, because as long as the started number is lower than the ongoing number, I'm a happy camper. And I read a grand total of 5,993 pages, working out to approximately 207 pages per day. So not too shabby there. Challenges and events. I only had one challenge I was really participating in February, and that was the Romance Readers Reading Group on Goodreads. So I have now completed this challenge in its entirety, like every month, for 4 years and 2 months. I do like keeping track of that statistic because I'm curious as the years go on, like how many years am I going to do this and how many years am I going to complete it every month? And I did complete it in February. So last thing, as I said, I wanted to talk about were my top 5 books of the month. And as always, I'm going from my least most favorite to my most favorite. So coming in the bottom spot, if you will, but still not a bad book. What's funny, actually, before I mention these, is that you guys probably know me as a romance reader. That's what I do. That's what I read. That's my bread and butter. I love it more than anything. But the month of February, of the 5-star, or of the top 5 books that I had, 3 of them were thrillers. One was a contemporary romance, and one was a chick lit. So that is not the norm for me. No, I am not now starting to gravitate more towards thrillers. February, I just happen to have, some of them that I really enjoyed, like that I read. If a little bit earlier, I just said I only read 3 of them, and all 3 of them ended up in my top 5 books. So clearly I enjoy thrillers, and I do want to read more of them, but I do find they can be very dark. And I mentioned this in my last vlog when I was talking about one of the books, that they are very dark, and as much as I enjoy them, I cannot read them all the time. I need my contemporaries to kind of balance it out, even more so. And I'm looking forward to reading a lot of contemporaries in March. So yeah. But anyway, as I was saying, my least most favorite book of the month was I Found You by Lisa Jewell. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Lisa Jewell is very quickly becoming a favorite author of mine. This book was fantastic. Again, it's a thriller, so I can't talk too much about what it's actually about, but it involves a missing person, mistaken identity, some man just shows up on a beach without his memory. And that's really all I want to say about it, because you really, really need to go into this one blind. It was so, so good. I borrowed this one from my library. This is the one I read in trade paperback, and it was highly, highly enjoyable. If you are working your way through or reading Lisa Jewell as well, this is an older one that I hadn't heard too much about or anybody really talking about, and I absolutely recommend that you check it out yourself. Next up, no surprise, here's my contemporary, A Cowboy for All Seasons. This was the anthology, and it was by Maisie Yates, Nicole Helm, Caitlin Cruz, and Jackie Asherden. This one also got a 4.5 star rating from me. I loved this book so much. Oh my gosh, it was so fantastic. If you love contemporary romance and you love a good cowboy contemporary romance, this one just fits the bill. And it checkmarks so many of the things that I love in anthologies. The main thing being that I love when anthologies fit together. The stories follow one another. They are all part of the same world, or the same, whatever you want to call it. And these 4 authors work together to create an anthology that was seamless. It read almost like a novel. Like, do you know what I mean? In 4 parts, with 4 different authors. That's almost how I looked at it. The thing is that with an anthology, you should be able to pick up any of the stories separately and read them without context of anything else. In this case, you need to read all 4 because they follow one another, and it was so good. Oh my gosh. So amazing. I should tell you the premise of it. So, as I said, it's called The Cowboy for All Seasons, and essentially what it is, it's about this grandmother whose name is June, and she has 4 granddaughters. 2 of the granddaughters are sisters, and the other 2 are their cousins. So all 4 of the girls are cousins to each other, but 2 of them are sisters, if that makes sense. And in the grandmother's will, she stipulates that each of the girls, they're now grown women, need to come and stay at this farmhouse where they spent their summers as young girls and spend a season. Each one spends a different season in the house. And the grandmother from, beyond, if you will, there's nothing magical realism about this, but you can definitely see the grandmother was kind of setting things up to happen a certain way prior to her passing, and with having the girls come up and just hoping that, if you will, nature would take its course. And helping all 4 of them, of course, find love. And it was delightful. It takes place in a small town. These women are struggling, and, the cowboys are amazing. This book was fantastic. Like I said, pick this one up if you were a fan of cowboy contemporary or just contemporary. Or, I had already read Maisie Yates, Nicole Helm, Caitlin Cruz. Jackie Asherden was new to me, and her book, I think, or her story was probably one of my favorites in this anthology, and I definitely now want to check out more of her work. Coming in next was another thriller, and that was The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. Oh my gosh, this one got another 4.5-star rating from me. This was creepy. It was so good. It takes place at a girls' boarding school about a girl who, who in the 1970s, I think, or the 1980s, is killed. Or maybe it was the 90s. I always forget what year we're currently in, and I'm like, the 90s was like 5 years ago, wasn't it? Might have been the 90s. I forget how old I am, too. Don't worry, you guys. So anyway, she was killed some time ago, and her younger sister is still investigating her murder, because even though this girl's boyfriend was convicted of her murder, the sister still doesn't believe that that's true. And this book, as I love, as is catnip to me, goes back and forth in time to the 1950s, I think, to this boarding school in the 1950s, to modern day. It was so good. I listened to it on audio, and it was absolutely fantastic. I recommend it if you can listen to it that way or read it that way. Really, really good. Highly enjoyable. Again, I don't want to say much more than that, although this book was creepy and, had that really dark element to it. Absolutely a book that I could see being enjoyed in the fall. For those of you who read seasonally, this is definitely a fall book. Next up, my second most favorite book of the month, and this is the one that was my first read of the month, and it was called I Owe You One by Sophie Kinsella. This one I gave 5 stars to. I love this book. I talked about this one in my vlog and how much this one meant to me, and if at any other point in time, if I had read this a year ago, 6 months ago, I don't think it would have meant the same to me as it meant to me in this context, like reading it when I read it. Because for those of you who probably know, have been watching me for a while, that I lost my dad 6 weeks ago to cancer. He fought long and hard, and unfortunately, it was his time. And so about 2 weeks after he passed, I heard about this book, or I saw it somewhere, and I put it on hold at the library, and I think it had something like a 16-week wait time. And literally the next day, I got an alert stating that it was currently available as a short-term loan. This sometimes comes up for the Toronto Library. I don't know if your library is the same on Overdrive or Libby, but it's called Front of the Line or something, that, randomly they will put books front of the line and they will let somebody borrow them, but you only have it for 7 days. And literally the next day, this one came up. And it wasn't on my TBR for February, and I thought, you know what, why not? It sounded cute. The premise of the story is about a girl, or a woman, excuse me, who ends up saving this guy's laptop at a coffee shop from certain destruction. And then on a coffee sleeve, he writes, like, I owe you one. And then the story ends up going back and forth between the two of them, kind of helping each other out. And then, of course, a romance develops. It takes place, I believe, over the course of like a year. And if I'm remembering correctly. And of the two of them, and it was really good. It was definitely a chick lit. It wasn't as funny as I remember Confessions of a Shopaholic being, but it was still really delightful. But what pushed this story up, as I was saying, is that, tying into my father's passing, was that our main character in this story, her dad passed 9 years earlier. And throughout reading about it, they still talked about him. They still mentioned him. He had a chair at the kitchen table that nobody sat in. I think it was really something I needed to read at the time that I read it, to kind of help me, because you keep thinking, like, am I thinking about this person too much? Am I dwelling on it too much? And the answer is no. As you go out throughout your life, you're going to remember things about people, and that's okay. Of course, it's going to be a lot more at the very beginning, like almost every day now. I think about something about him, and it's been particularly difficult. Of course, it's going to be at the beginning. But this book showed me that even, 5, 6, 9 years later, you can still, you get to the point in your grieving process where you stop being sad remembering them and you start being happy remembering them, if that makes sense. And I'm trying not to cry. Sorry, this book really meant a lot to me. And I don't think it was the author's intention. um, but that's how I felt with this story. And that's why it got a 5-star read for me. And like I said, if I had read it 6 months ago, it might not have. You know, it was a good story. It was highly enjoyable. But it truly meant something to me. And I think that's why. And I know that's why it got the 5-star rating. And for a completely different change of tune, my favorite book of the month. I really kind of did the toss up between this one and I Owe You One, but I had to admit that, like I said with I Owe You One, if I'd read it 6 months ago, it might not have gotten a 5-star review. But this one, no matter when I read this one, would have definitely gotten a 5-star, which is why it was rated a little bit higher on my list, even though it was also a 5-star. And that is The Sundown Motel, again by Simone St. James. Oh my gosh, you guys. Oh my gosh. This book was creepy as you know what. I was reading this the other night because I finished this about 10 o'clock at night on Saturday on the 31st, or on the 29th of February. And the night before I was reading it was Friday night, I was reading it. And my husband was at work, and I had to stop reading it because I kept glancing over my shoulder and glancing down the hall. This book was filled with twists and turns and things that go bump in the night. It was fabulous. It was definitely a ghost story. There is definitely ghost elements in it. And without giving too much away, it's not the maybe there is, maybe there isn't a ghost. No, no, no. There are clearly ghosts in this story. There are a lot of what people would consider, if they saw this as a movie, as jump scares. Door slamming and, people suddenly appearing and stuff like that. If this was made into a movie, I guarantee you I would not go see it in theater because it would be far too creepy. With a book, I can put it down. So, to give you just a very small taste of what the premise of this book is about, because I went into this one completely blind. I knew it was Simone St. James. The cover intrigued me. I had not read this author before when I requested this one on NetGalley, so this was a NetGalley read, but I knew that it was one that I had heard a lot of hype about with the Broken Girls, and that's why I read the Broken Girls as well, so I could try and compare the two when I did my review. But so this is about, it's a dual timeline, which I love, and it takes place between 1982 and 2017. And in 1982, a 20-year-old girl goes missing who is working, she's the night clerk, the girl behind the desk, overnights at this Sundown Motel in small town upstate New York. And 35 years later, her niece, who she never met because the niece was born many, many years after the aunt disappeared, is now wanting to find out what happened to her aunt. And comes to this small town, and the story goes from there. So it goes back and forth in time. Absolutely amazing. If you guys are like, I don't know if it's going to be my thing. Yes, it's a little creepy. Yes, it's a little scary. Go into that forewarned. I am also a big wimp, so take that with a grain of salt, if you will. I have never seen a Stephen King movie, never read a Stephen King book. I don't like horror movies. I don't like any of those things. But this book was just edge of your seat. So, so good. And I loved it. So anyway, guys, that is all that I have for this video today. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments below. What was your favorite book that you read in the month of February? Or have you read any of the books that I talked about in my top 5? And what did you think about them? And until my next video, everybody, take care and happy reading. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye, guys.